Good morning. I got up early this morning. I was inspired by the revelations of the interregnum between my phase 1 sleeping and my phase 2 sleeping. The gap between was rich with imagery. And I went to sleep and prepared my mind to be a fertile receptacle for inspiration. And I humbly suggest that you might consider doing that too. Going to sleep in that same frame of mind. Consciously reminding yourself to be open to the gifts of the universe. So I'm feeling inspired this morning, and I can't get away from polarities, the richness for me, the seeds for sharing. Just continue to be inspired by looking at opposites. And recently I've been looking at micro and macro, the small focus, microscopic, to look at the tiny, the minute, and macro best seen through telescopic view. And quite honestly, I tend to be a macro guy. I'm not really into the details. I'm not a detail guy. But it doesn't mean that I can't appreciate the beauty of detail, of the extremely small. Because I find that going into the small will open you back up to the large, looking at things, small things can flower into the large, the macro, the wide, open view. And I had 2 themes today, and I'll go into them, but I want to start first with what's been really on my mind. A few videos back, 4 videos back, I talked about the tools of inquiry, the things that were available to you. And I talked about my habit of doubt, my doubt that bordered on skepticism to every bit of information that came from without, that was put in here, that my mind ruminated about. And what caused the rumination, what caused this digestion, was to first break it down by doubt, using my mind to separate the chaff from the wheat. By rigorous examination of what's not so, leaving conveniently what possibly might be so. And even the healthy dose of doubt persisted. It was consistent in my haphazard methodology. I don't claim to be systematic. I tend to jump all around, but I think the results are similar, at least satisfactory for my intents and purposes, for me. And when I was looking at my micro and looking at doubt, bordering on skepticism. To be a skeptic seemed a sensible thing for me to do because there's so much misinformation. We're so misinformed. And it led me to, just recently, my random readings have a sense and rhythm and rhyme of their own, and I've long past trying to figure it out. I just accept and enjoy it, the fruits of my intellectual inquiry. Just randomly, sequentially, ended up reading about Narajuna, Buddhist philosopher, a couple of centuries after the Buddha, who used doubt as his primary tool of inquiry. And I thought, a kindred soul who knew a lot more than I did. I stumbled upon mine just because it's innate in my nature, I think. I just learned to accept it as part of who I am. But here I found someone, an ally, who adhered to similar process. 200 years before Christ was born. And Narajuna was born a Hindu, born into the Brahmin class, the priestly class, the top echelon of the Hindu caste system. And in the course of growing up, he started philosophically inquiring, learning, and came up with a concept he called sunyata, the concept of emptiness, which has been greatly misunderstood and mostly misinterpreted in the consequent thought. But the seed of this, the impetus of this, was a micro view looking at the small details. And the Brahmanism had influenced Buddhism. Narajuna moved from southern India to northern India. In the process, northern India was this rich philosophical environment. Arguably, I feel like Donald Trump tried to say anonymous, which many pundits feel was the highlight of philosophical thought. And there was a rich combination of Brahmanism and Buddhism. And Narajuna found that Buddhism, the tenets of Buddhism, rang truer for him, and he left his Brahmin tradition, the Brahmanism, and went into Hinduism. But he immediately found that Buddhism of the Buddha, that the Buddha taught. Minimalism, the concept of if you were asked a question, probably the most appropriate answer is don't know. Metaphysical subjects, which the dialogue between the Brahmanism and Buddhism led Buddhism, this is in Nararjuna's opinion, led Buddhism to adopting metaphysical views that the Buddha purposely chose not to talk about. And in this rich metaphysical environment, the Buddhists seemed to want to respond, and they created big metaphysical questions. And Nararjuna rightfully saw most of the Brahmins' insistence on the idea that some things were permanent and some things were less ethereal, less than permanent. And what Nararjuna saw was that the Brahmins, being on the top of the hierarchy, had a vested interest in protecting this hierarchical structure. And the insistence that there would be something permanent, that they were equipped to look at the big picture of God's nature and questions of import to metaphysicians, the macro, the big questions. But he saw through this as a guise for the Brahmins to protect their position by not only supporting but promoting the rigid caste system that they were born into. They were appreciating the fruits of this caste system. And Nararjuna felt by deconstructing, by going back to what the Buddha had taught, getting away from the macro, getting away from the big picture and focusing back on what's in your realm of possibilities is within. Those big things really were no import because, number one, they were basically unknowable. And in the current form, in the human body, at our current stage of evolution, these things were unknowable. And Sanyata is the concept of emptiness, as I mentioned before. He used this because the emptiness of these big macro questions, the essential, the end game was that they were beyond. We needed this priestly class to interpret, for us to interpret this, and he thought that, as the Buddha stated, that we all had the innate right and ability to pursue for ourselves our reuniting with the infinite. So what was so critical, and what I guess Nararjuna, he resonates with me for being a doubtful skeptic, and also if everything is impermanent, there's no fixed hierarchy. change can take place. And change, in his argument, was all that there was. Everything changed. And he saw that the caste system, the Brahman caste system, needed to change. Its inequities bothered him enough that he changed and adopted Buddhism, which he felt was more inclusive, a lot less exclusive. But he had to respond to what was going on in the Buddhist community as well. So using the guiding principle that all things are subject to change, not only subject to change, but change is the one constant in the observable universe. And we should embrace change. We shouldn't develop an elaborate system that tries to slow down wow, the tongue is not too glib today. But clinging to permanence in an impermanence world was, after all, the source of suffering. So this effort to reform the Theravada, the lesser wheel that was the state of Buddhism as he found it in his time, closer and closer to the Hindu, to the Brahmins' metaphysical views. And his sunyata, his concept of emptiness, impermanence, all things are subject, all things do change, led to the development of the Mahayana Buddhism, the greater wheel, which became Tibetan Buddhism, and now parts of Southeast Asian Buddhist thought. And again, more schisms, and this is the bane of any kind of human endeavor, it seems. But Nararjuna wanted to bring things back to the Buddha, the original Buddha's teachings. So this is one macro, micro theme. And in that spirit, I did have something that I wanted to read about doubt and skepticism, because this, bear with me, but it says it so much better than I could. At the heart of what is called skepticism is doubt, a suspension of judgment about states of affairs or the correctness of some assertion. There are, of course, many things, both in the world and in the claims people make about the world, that can be doubted, questioned, rejected, or left in skeptical abeyance. Left in skeptical abeyance. Don't know. Beyond my job description. And that's only a small part of a really fascinating philosophical discourse, historical, philosophical overview focusing on tremendous gifts to the school of to the science, to the study. I didn't like that word science. To the study, the discipline of philosophy. India offered so much. And the second, I've been busy, okay, the last couple of days since I've shared with you. The second I lost my word here. The second aspect, I don't like that much, but I mentioned in the beginning my overview of micro and macro as polarities was twofold. And the second aspect was my interest in neutrinos. Neutrinos are subatomic particles that are super abundant in our universe, that are created in a nuclear fission, such as our sun, nuclear bombs. Particles that can go through minute, tiny little particles that radiate from nuclear fusion, radiate in huge numbers at speeds approaching the speed of light in all directions. They're so prevalent that if I hold my thumb up in this room and 60 million neutrinos pass through my thumb and me and the wall and everything. 60 billion, let's think, we're macro now, 60 billion pass through the square centimeter, my thumb, every second. So here in the theme, these are micro, we're looking at tiny little elements. And it was postulated as early as 1930 that they existed, even though they're too small. We've yet to see one today. We can see traces. In 1930, the brilliant scientists speculated about these minute particles that they had to exist. And 30 years later, it was validated. Of course, he was in his grave and he didn't care. But it's really scientific inquiry. It's not without its positive consequences, as well as the negative. Isn't that the polarity? Consequences of scientific dismissal of what can't be seen or what can't be tested. So these neutrinos, fascinating. And they started talking to scientists as I read farther. I've been interested in neutrinos for quite some time. And human design, Ra Uru Hu, who might know about it, spoke of neutrinos as vehicles of the transformation of information in the early 90s, late 80s, 1980s. And he mentioned that information is mass, that neutrinos had mass. Well, at that time, the consensus was that they didn't have mass. But once they could measure more accurately, they noticed that neutrinos they were a little bit slower than light, which meant that it had to have some mass. No matter how minute, which indeed it does, the mass is unbelievably minute in the realm, micro realms. Small, small, small. But only particles without mass, electromagnetic, light, only they can travel the speed of light. Anything slower than the speed of light, by definition, has to have some mass. Only massless particles can reach the speed of light. Now it's interesting because these neutrinos, 80% of the neutrinos that come to us here on Earth come from our sun. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that 20%. I'll talk about part of that 20% right now. I also read that scientists got quite excited when they figured out that shortly after the Big Bang, neutrinos in unbelievably big numbers went everywhere. And they are everywhere. As I sit and look at my room, it's estimated that in my room right now, in your room, in any given space in your body, there's, in this room for instance, there's 1 billion neutrinos that originated with the Big Bang. In this room, in my body. So when you talk about being part of the cosmos, you can take it literally, because the cosmos is all around us. There's 1 billion neutrinos in this room from the Big Bang, and somehow I find that comforting. But that's just me. I get my comfort wherever I can find it, I suppose. But neutrinos are fascinating too, because 80%, as I said, are coming down on us from the sun. And neutrinos pass through us, pass through everything. They pass in the billions. Like I said, square centimeter has 60 billion. I have no idea how many that is, but it's a lot. I'm confident that it's a lot. Pass through us, pass through the earth, and it's so rare for anything to stop it that if you measure neutrinos coming out of the opposite side from the sun, the part of the planet that's in nighttime, it's almost the same as direct the part of the earth that's in the light of the sun, passes through the earth, come out the other side without apparently affecting or changing anything that it passes through, which I find hard to believe. And I'll mention next that I can accept that it passes through us, but without some results, without some consequence, without something, it seems counterintuitive almost. But anyway, they say that to stop a neutrino would take a piece of lead to slow it, not stop it. 2-kilometer long piece of lead with a neutrino, it would slow the neutrino, but probably not stop it. So it would take a steel rod 4 light years long. That's long to completely stop the neutrino. So incredible incredible little particle, quite a fascinating little micro. And I love it because this micro opens you to the macro vision. You can't get more macro than the cosmos. So beginning with a microscope, which we still can't show it, and leading us to the telescopic view that I'm most comfortable in, these little kais. In 1987, a supernova called, surprisingly, a 1987A supernova went off relatively close, so close that it was observable with the naked eye. The appropriate time after it happened in 1987, and then, I'm not sure, it took 5 years for the light to reach us. However long it took the light to reach us, it was visible, especially in the southern hemisphere. I understand Chile, it was quite remarkable that people stopped what they were doing to see this in the daylight sky, this massive explosion. And those neutrinos have been traceable. They're with us now. They're all around us now. In Ra, from the human design system, postulated that neutrinos delivered information. And this was in 1987. This was before the scientists discovered that neutrinos indeed had mass. And only now they're looking at these neutrinos as possible conductors, transmitters of information. And this makes sense to me that as they pass through our body, that this information from the cosmos is deposited in our bodies, that we know intuitively. Again, scientific fact, not. But speculation, less than idle speculation. It just makes sense to me that. And Ra said that from 1987, the supernova, a quiet, abundant, hereto unknown information was made available to all of us. And primarily on a subconscious or unconscious level. So here we are. Micro leads to macro. When you look at macro, you see it contains the micro, inherent in the nature, supporting the concept of non-duality. Dualism can be seen in this way that eliminates two, both opposites are part of the whole, the oneness, the unity, the beauty of our birthright, shared by each and every one of us.